The note on the kitchen table said the orchard was yours now, but the first rule was written in your father's blood and addressed to whatever came back wearing him. Case file TR116, filed by the Twilight Registry after the county records office discovered a room that had never been built, filled with boxes addressed to people who had not died yet. The first witness statement came from a night clerk who insisted the anomaly was not a ghost, not a person, and not a weather event. It was a pattern of absence. Phones rang with no caller ID, but only in houses where someone had recently lied about what they saw near the tree line. Dogs faced closets and wagged their tails as if greeting a beloved owner. Children began drawing the same door in the margins of homework. A narrow black rectangle with 3 brass numbers, always scratched out before anyone could read them. By the third report, the registry had enough to open a formal case. Deputy Mara Voss found tire tracks ending in the center of a frost-white field. The vehicle was located 2 miles away, inside an abandoned church. Its windows steamed from the inside, though the engine was cold. In the passenger seat lay a cassette recorder. It played only when held under running water. The voice on the tape was Mara's own, older by decades, calmly describing the exact moment she would decide not to run. Residents of Bellwether County were instructed to preserve all household mirrors, avoid answering knocks after 2:17 a.m., and report any relative who returned from outside smelling of wet paper. The instruction arrived too late for the Gilman family. Their kitchen camera recorded 6 people at breakfast in a house registered to 4 occupants. The extra 2 figures sat politely at the table, faces turned away from the lens, hands folded around mugs of black water. Every family member later swore they had been alone. Evidence item A is a photograph from the county fair. In the foreground, teenagers grin beneath strings of yellow bulbs. In the background, behind the ring-toss booth, stands a woman in a funeral veil. Enlargement reveals not a face, but a hallway receding through her head. Doors line both sides. At the far end, a small hand presses against glass from the wrong side of the photograph. Evidence item B is the recovered audio from the emergency line. The caller whispers that someone is in the walls, counting backward from the day she was born. The dispatcher asks for an address. The caller gives the address of the dispatch center. When officers check the recording room, they find wet footprints circling the chair and a single tooth on the microphone grill. Dental records match the caller, who is alive at the time and sitting in her locked bedroom 8 miles away. The registry's working theory was contamination by a place that behaves like memory. It does not enter through doors. It enters through agreement. The more the town repeats the same explanation, the stronger the impossible version becomes. People who say it was only fog begin coughing up gray thread. People who say it was only a prank find unfamiliar handwriting in their journals, finishing sentences they have not started. The registry later determined the rules were not warnings. They were table manners. The registry interviews did not agree on shape, only on consequence. One witness described a mouth opening in wallpaper, Another described a staircase descending through a linen closet into a field of black grass. A third refused to describe anything at all, and instead mailed the registry a jar of moths, each wing marked with a tiny human fingerprint. When the jar was opened, the moths flew in formation over a county map and died above 7 addresses. At each address, investigators found a household object that had learned to imitate grief. A radio sobbed in a grandmother's voice. A bathtub filled itself with tears that contained no salt. A child's music box played a hymn backwards, then asked if anyone remembered what was buried under the school. These were not hauntings in the classical sense. They were rehearsals. Something was teaching ordinary rooms how to mourn before giving them a body to mourn for. Agent Harlow noted that the phenomenon favored families with unfinished stories, estranged siblings, parents who hid medical diagnoses, town officials who sealed accident reports. The anomaly found every silence and widened it. It made secrets architectural. Closets gained depth. Basements gained doors. Hallways took longer to cross after arguments. People began leaving notes for versions of themselves who might come home kinder. By the 6th night, the county's emergency services stopped using names on the radio. Names attracted responses. Dispatchers switched to numbers, then to clicks, then to silence. Still the voices came through. They knew birthdays, nicknames, private prayers, and the exact sound each caller would make at the end. The recordings remained sealed because 3 interns who transcribed them later answered telephones that were not plugged in. The most damaging evidence was recovered from a school bus camera. The bus travels a normal rural route until the windows darken. Children inside continue talking, unaware that the road outside has become an interior corridor lined with family photographs. In every frame, the photographs age. Parents become elderly. Infants become adults. The driver keeps both hands on the wheel and whispers that he will not stop for anyone waving from the shoulder. At timestamp 1822, every child turns to the rear camera and says in perfect unison, "We have always been on the way home." No bodies were recovered from that route because the bus arrived at school on time. The children stepped out unharmed, except each carried a permission slip signed by a parent who had died before they were born. The slips authorized a field trip to an address that does not exist. On the back, in childish block letters, someone had written, "Bring something you can afford to lose." At 4:06 a.m., all power failed, except for the courthouse archive. Inside, every fluorescent tube burned blue. Agent Harlow descended to the basement and found the missing records arranged in a circle. Each folder contained a birth certificate, a death certificate, and a third form with no title. The third form listed a date between the first 2 and a signature line already filled in by the subject. Harlow read one aloud before understanding the rule. The name belonged to a woman named Lenora Pike, asleep across town. Her husband woke to hear her speaking in a clerk's voice, reciting parcel numbers and burial depths. By dawn, Lenora's shadow no longer matched her body. It stood when she sat. It turned toward the basement beneath the courthouse whenever anyone said her name. The town tried denial next. They boarded windows, shut down the fairgrounds, locked the church, and burned the photograph. The photograph returned in the morning as ash on every pillow, each grain arranged into the image of the veiled woman. When swept away, the ash whispered. When vacuumed, it clogged the machine with hair that was still warm. Mara Voss entered the abandoned church alone because the tape said she would. On the altar, she found a ledger open to her page. Beneath her name was a list of every choice she had made to survive, each written as a debt. The last line read, "Open the door for the next witness." Behind the altar, where stone should have been, waited the narrow black door from the children's drawings. The brass numbers had finally become visible. 51-6. Her body camera shows her hand on the knob. It also shows 6 seconds of footage that cannot be reconciled with the church interior. A corridor, water on the ceiling, people standing behind frosted glass, mouthing words too slowly to be prayer. Mara asks who they are. A child's voice answers, "We are the versions your town refused to remember." The final escalation occurred at sunrise. Every resident received a letter in their own handwriting. Some were apologies, some were confessions, some were instructions for funerals decades away. The letters all ended with the same sentence: "Do not let the registry close the file, because closure is how it gets a permanent address." Mara Voss returned at 7:12 a.m. with frost on her uniform and no reflection in any surface. She submitted one additional piece of evidence, a cassette recorder filled with water. The tape now contains a voice that is not Mara's. It says the case is unresolved, the door is still looking for witnesses, and anyone who has heard this file should check the nearest hallway before speaking their own name. The town meeting failed when the microphone began translating every denial into confession. A councilman said there was no danger, and the speakers announced that he had buried the first report in 1998. A pastor said the community must remain calm, and the speakers described the locked room below the rectory. A mother stood to ask whether her missing daughter was alive. The microphone answered before she spoke. "Right for 19%. I want to squeak in the ideation that I am doing for what I see. If I start it again, I will be bapping the back rights. Just with my out-of-read interview toast for your negative ability perfectry. The lides are focable for enorance. Mean like my treachery. When I support something shock is packed, my fingers are out of the glow. For another interest court, and ruster for a mears from different tats. And swatting to me, what are you getting? Moments, we schwager. My 50 million real is afflicted. The sleep is definitely previous. My first work not will even convent. The phonophone legitimely faintly allied as tight. They communicated by hand, signal, until the signals changed meaning. Stopped became come closer. Danger became mother. Retreat became open. The cameras show the agents realizing the corruption is not auditory. It is semantic. Meaning itself has become a door. Final registry note. Bellwether County was removed from 3 state maps, then restored after public inquiry. The courthouse basement remains sealed. The seal is checked weekly. On the last inspection, someone had written from the inside with a wet finger, "Thank you for keeping us filed."